Imagine you're sitting on a plane, ready to take off, when out of nowhere, an encounter with an entitled stranger flips your world upside down. A young black girl, Maya, clutching her life-saving medication, is about to face the unimaginable when a woman, an HOA Karen, snatches her pills, throwing them on the floor, destroying them in front of her eyes. As the plane's engines start to roar, her father, David, a man who would go to any length to protect his daughter, makes a shocking decision. In a moment of pure defiance, he stands up, turns to the flight crew, and declares, "I'm grounding this plane." The crowd watches in disbelief as David does what no one expected, risking everything for his daughter's safety. What happens next? The shocking consequences of this moment will leave you breathless. Stick around to find out. Hey, everyone, welcome back to the channel. Before we dive into today's story, I want to hear from you. Comment below and let me know, where are you watching this from? Your city, your country. Let's see how far this story can reach. Now, let's get into it. This isn't just another story. This is something that will make you question what you would do if you were faced with an impossible decision. Picture this. You're on a plane, on your way to a well-deserved vacation or a family reunion. You're sitting back, ready to relax, when a simple act of cruelty changes everything. Maya, a young 16-year-old girl, is traveling with her father, David. She's carrying something precious, something that most people wouldn't even think twice about: life-saving medication. For her, those pills aren't just a prescription, they are the difference between life and death. But as fate would have it, on this flight, Maya crosses paths with someone who doesn't see the value of what she's holding. An entitled woman, an HOA Karen, decides that those pills don't belong on her flight, and in a shocking act of arrogance, she destroys them right in front of Maya. The situation goes from tense to terrifying in a matter of seconds. And just when it seems like there's no hope, Maya's father, David, makes a decision that no one saw coming. He stands up, looks around, and declares, "I'm grounding this plane." What happens next is nothing short of unbelievable. It's a story of courage, defiance, and the lengths a father will go to protect his child. So, sit tight, because this one's going to take you on an emotional roller coaster. Let's jump into it. The airport was buzzing with activity like any other early morning. The sun had barely risen, and passengers shuffled through the security lines, some tired from the early flight, others excited for the journey ahead. The sound of rolling suitcases, the announcements echoing through the overhead speakers, and the faint scent of coffee from the nearby cafes set the tone for a typical day of air travel. It was nothing out of the ordinary until it was. Maya, a 16-year-old girl with dark braids cascading down her back, stood by the check-in counter with her father, David. Her father was a man of few words, but there was something fierce about the way he carried himself. A tall, broad-shouldered man, he was protective of his daughter, especially on days like this when they were traveling. Maya's mother had passed away a few years earlier, and David had taken it upon himself to fill both roles, father and mother. He wasn't perfect, but his love for Maya was immeasurable. Maya was quietly adjusting her backpack when David noticed a familiar feeling tugging at him. He'd been through this airport 100 times, but today, something felt different. There was a slight unease in the air, as if the universe was setting the stage for something they couldn't control. He brushed it off, assuming it was just his mind playing tricks on him. After all, they were headed to visit some relatives across the country. It should have been a simple, peaceful flight. They were heading to the gate when Maya's eyes wandered to the rows of seats, searching for a place to sit while they waited for boarding to begin. That was when she saw her. The woman, Karen. She stood near the entrance to the gate, scanning the crowd with an air of superiority that Maya instantly felt. She was tall, blonde, and impeccably dressed in an expensive-looking business suit. Her eyes seemed to have an icy, judgmental gleam in them as they moved from one person to the next. Maya wasn't one to judge others based on appearance, but something about the way this woman carried herself immediately rubbed her the wrong way. Maya nudged her father gently. "Dad, look, I think she's staring at us." David followed his daughter's gaze. His protective instincts kicked in. But he wasn't sure if he should say anything. Ignore her, Maya. People like that are usually too self-absorbed to matter. But it wasn't long before Maya realized that the woman wasn't just staring, they were being watched. Karen's gaze never wavered, and as Maya and David approached the gate, the woman stepped forward. "Excuse me," Karen called out, her voice cutting through the crowd like a knife. David stopped mid-step, instinctively putting himself between Maya and the stranger. "Yes, can I help you?" Karen's eyes narrowed. "You can't bring that on this flight. It's a violation of the rules," she said, pointing to the small bag Maya was holding. Maya's stomach dropped. She didn't understand what the woman was talking about. Her bag contained her medication, something she needed for her health. But why would that be an issue? She had flown countless times with the same prescription in hand. It wasn't like she was carrying anything dangerous. David could sense the rising tension. "Ma'am, that's my daughter's medication. She needs it," he said, trying to stay calm. His voice, though steady, betrayed a hint of frustration. Karen wasn't hearing him. "I don't care what it is. You can't bring that garbage on this plane. It's a health risk, and I'm just trying to keep everyone safe," she snapped, stepping closer, her tone dripping with condescension. "People like you think you can just get away with anything, don't you?" Maya's heart began to race. She had been in situations where people had made her feel different, singled her out because of her race, but this was different. This wasn't just a random comment. This felt like an attack, a deliberate attempt to strip her of something vital, her right to travel with her medication. "Excuse me?" David's voice was much firmer now. "You have no right to question my daughter's medication. It's life-saving and it's staying with us." Karen, apparently unfazed, let out a mocking laugh. "Life-saving, huh? Sure, that's what you all say. But I've seen enough to know that people like you are always pushing the limits. I'm not letting this go." Maya stood still, her mind spinning. She had never experienced anything like this. She had always been taught that if she was kind, if she followed the rules, people would treat her the same as anyone else. But here, in this airport, with her medication in her hands, it was as though the world was turning against her. David could see his daughter's anxiety rising, and his protective instincts kicked in harder. He stepped forward, his towering presence making it clear that he wasn't backing down. "I'll ask you one more time," he said, his voice low but menacing. "Step aside. This is not your business." Wasn't done. "I'm doing this for the safety of the other passengers. You people think you're entitled to special treatment. Well, I'm not going to let that happen today." She reached out, grabbing the bag from Maya's hands. The sudden, forceful action caught both father and daughter off guard. "What are you doing?" David's voice rose, and he stepped forward, trying to reclaim the bag. But it was too late. With one swift motion, Karen tore the bag open, scattering the contents across the floor of the terminal. Pills, Maya's life-saving medication, spilled out in every direction. The small, clear bottles rolled and clinked as they hit the hard floor, the sound of glass shattering like a cruel reminder of what had just happened. Maya felt her knees buckle beneath her. Her heart pounded in her chest as the world seemed to close in on her. "No, no, no, no." Maya gasped, scrambling to pick up the pieces, but it was too late. The pills were ruined. David was beside her in an instant, his hands trembling as he tried to gather what was left of the broken bottles. His voice was shaking with anger now. "What have you done?" But Karen wasn't backing down. She crossed her arms smugly, staring at them like they were the problem. "You should have known better. I won't let anyone jeopardize my safety or the safety of my family." In that moment, David's mind was a whirlwind of emotions. He was furious. He was devastated. But most of all, he felt a deep sense of powerlessness. His daughter's health, her very life, was in the hands of a stranger, and that stranger had just destroyed everything they had worked so hard to protect. But David wasn't the type to back down. He wasn't going to let Maya's health be endangered over someone's ignorance or prejudice. What happened next would change everything. He took a deep breath, turned to the gate agent, and made a decision that would leave everyone speechless. "Call the captain," he said, his voice now calm but firm. This plane is not leaving until my daughter's medication is replaced. I'm grounding this flight. And just like that, the situation took a turn no one could have anticipated. The moment David spoke, the air in the terminal seemed to shift. It was as if time slowed down, and everything in the airport, from the murmur of voices to the footsteps echoing on the floor, came to a halt. The passengers nearby turned their heads, some curious, others confused, wondering why a man was standing at the gate, so determined to stop a flight. David's voice was unwavering, but his fists clenched tightly at his sides. He had always prided himself on staying calm under pressure, but today, something inside him snapped. This was no longer just about a flight. This was about his daughter's life. Maya's hands were trembling as she knelt on the floor, desperately trying to collect the pills that had been destroyed. The pills, which were supposed to keep her alive, now lay scattered across the tile. Her heart ached as she picked up each bottle, only to realize it was beyond repair. One bottle was shattered completely, its contents spilled and mixed with the remnants of broken glass. The others, though still intact, had their lids twisted or cracked open from the force with which Karen had tossed them aside. She looked up at her father, tears welling in her eyes. "Dad, what are we going to do?" "The pills, they're gone." David's heart broke as he knelt beside her. He could see the panic in her eyes, the fear of what was to come. He had always told her that no matter what, he would protect her. And here he was, faced with a situation that he never thought he'd have to deal with. No one had ever warned him that he might have to stand up to something like this, an entitled stranger who would stop at nothing to make a point, even if it meant destroying the very thing Maya needed to survive. "Don't worry, Maya," David said, his voice gentle but firm, trying to calm her. "We'll fix this. I won't let anything happen to you. We'll get your medication replaced. I promise." But inside, David was seething. He couldn't believe what had just happened. This wasn't just an accident, it was an act of malice. He could feel the anger rising in him, a fury he had never experienced before. And it wasn't just because of what Karen had done to his daughter's medication. It was the fact that she had done it without a second thought, that she had assumed, with all her entitled arrogance, that she had the right to take matters into her own hands. David stood up, his back straight, as he faced the gate agent who had been watching the entire situation unfold. "I need to speak with the captain. Now." The agent, a young woman in her 20s, looked startled. "Sir, I can't just get you the captain. We have procedures, and—" "I don't care about procedures," David interrupted, his voice low and controlled, but carrying an unmistakable intensity. "My daughter's medication is destroyed, and this flight is not going anywhere until it is replaced. I will not let anyone take my daughter's health for granted. I don't care how long it takes, but we are not leaving this gate." The agent hesitated, unsure of what to do. She was trained to follow protocol, to handle customer complaints with a professional demeanor, but nothing in her training had prepared her for a father demanding the grounding of an entire flight over a destroyed bottle of medication. She glanced around nervously, then picked up the phone and called the captain. "Please hold," the agent said, her voice shaking slightly. "I'll get someone to speak with you." David didn't take his eyes off the woman, his jaw set in a way that made it clear he wasn't going to back down. Maya, still kneeling on the floor, had stopped trying to collect the pills. She simply sat there, her back against the wall, her eyes lost in the mess that Karen had left behind. But the moments that passed felt like hours. David could hear the distant sound of the boarding announcement, and his patience was wearing thin. The idea of getting on that plane without his daughter's medication, without the very thing she needed to stay healthy, was unimaginable. He thought about what might happen if they were allowed to fly. He thought about how Maya could have an episode, how she could go into a medical crisis in the air, far away from help. As the minutes dragged on, David's mind raced. His protective instincts were on high alert. How had it come to this? How had they ended up in a situation where his daughter's health was in jeopardy over something so simple as a stranger's disregard for basic humanity? Maya had always been the quiet, thoughtful one, and David was determined to keep her safe. This wasn't the world he had imagined for her when she was born. He had always dreamed of her being able to live freely, without fear. And now, here they were, faced with an injustice that was hard to even comprehend. Finally, the gate agent returned, her face a mixture of uncertainty and frustration. "I've spoken with the captain," she said, her voice tinged with stress. "The flight is delayed, but we need you to speak with the customer service desk for a resolution. The captain says it's a medical issue, but—" David interrupted, standing up straight. "Tell the captain that I'm not leaving this gate until my daughter's medication is replaced. I will not allow them to continue this flight while my daughter is at risk." The agent looked as if she might argue, but David's tone left no room for negotiation. This wasn't about rules anymore. It was about doing the right thing. Finally, the agent nodded, seemingly defeated. David turned to the other passengers in the waiting area. A few had been watching the entire exchange, and now their eyes were locked on him. Some looked uncomfortable, others curious, but no one dared to speak up. Karen, standing off to the side, was watching as well, her expression a mixture of confusion and defiance. It was clear she didn't understand why anyone would be so upset over a little bit of medication. She crossed her arms, her face a mask of superiority, still convinced she had done the right thing. David's eyes narrowed as he looked at her. "You're the reason we're in this mess," he said coldly, his voice now carrying across the terminal. "I hope you realize that." Karen stiffened but didn't respond. She didn't even apologize. She simply turned her head away, as though pretending the situation wasn't hers to own. David felt the fire of anger burn brighter, but he forced it down. He didn't have time to focus on Karen. His daughter's health was on the line, and he wasn't going to let this woman's ignorance take any more from them. He turned his attention back to the gate agent. "Please," David said, his voice soft but resolute. "I need a resolution. My daughter's life depends on it." The gate agent hesitated, then finally nodded. "I'll let customer service know. Please stay right here." As she walked away, David turned to Maya, who had gotten to her feet, her face pale and tired. He could see the exhaustion in her eyes, the fear that had settled into her chest. "Hey, it's going to be okay," he reassured her, putting a hand on her shoulder. "We're going to fix this. I promise you we'll get through this together." But in that moment, as David looked around the terminal, he realized something. This wasn't just a battle for medication. It was a battle against ignorance, entitlement, and injustice. And he wasn't backing down. The minutes stretched on like hours as David stood at the gate, waiting for a resolution that seemed like it might never come. Maya sat beside him, her eyes dull with exhaustion, her hands still trembling from the shock of what had just happened. The airport buzzed with activity around them, but it felt as if the rest of the world was moving in slow motion. To David, the noise of travelers' announcements and rolling suitcases all became distant hums, insignificant sounds compared to the turmoil that was happening just a few feet away from him. Maya's medication, her lifeline, was destroyed. The pills that kept her healthy, that kept her alive, were scattered across the airport floor, ruined by the selfish and uninformed actions of one woman. The moment Karen had snatched the bag from Maya's hands and ripped it open, David had felt his world tilt. He'd never been this powerless before, not when it came to his daughter. There were times when he had to protect her from hurtful words, from the cruelty of the world. But this was different. This was a direct assault on his daughter's well-being, on her ability to survive. And now he had to act, or else he might lose her in ways that he could never recover from. Maya glanced up at him, her voice barely a whisper. "Dad, I don't know what to do. I feel so hopeless." Her words were heavy, and he could hear the fear in them. For a moment, her gaze dropped to her knees, and she tugged nervously at the hem of her sweater. David's heart clenched. He wanted to tell her that everything would be okay, that there was nothing to worry about. But the truth was, he didn't know what was going to happen next. Everything in him screamed to take control of the situation, to fix it But in a moment like this, with no medication and a flight waiting to depart, he felt utterly helpless. "I'm sorry, Maya," David said, his voice cracking slightly. "I wish I could make it right. But I promise you, we're going to find a way to fix this. You don't have to be afraid." He squeezed her hand, trying to reassure her. But his own fear was beginning to build. What if the replacement medication didn't come in time? What if they couldn't find an alternative solution? And then, from the corner of his eye, he saw movement. The gate agent was back. This time, she wasn't alone. She had a man with her, a uniformed security officer, his face stern and unyielding. The officer's presence sent a wave of anxiety through David. He had dealt with customer service before, but security? This was taking things to a whole new level. "Sir," the gate agent said, her voice apologetic but still shaky, "I've spoken to the captain, and we're doing everything we can to resolve this issue. We've called for a replacement of your daughter's medication, but there are no guarantees that it will make it here in time. The flight is scheduled to depart soon." David felt his throat tighten. His daughter's health was at risk, and now it was up to him to make sure that nothing would stop them from getting the care she needed. He took a deep breath, refusing to let the fear consume him. "That's not good enough," David said, his voice steady but filled with resolve. "You need to delay this flight until the medication is here. I won't let my daughter board this plane without it. Her life is more important than any schedule." The security officer stepped forward, his arms crossed. "Sir, I understand you're upset, but we can't hold up a flight indefinitely. We have procedures to follow, and we have other passengers to consider. If you don't comply, we'll have to ask you to leave the gate area." David's pulse quickened, but he refused to back down. He turned to the security officer, locking eyes with him. "My daughter's health isn't something I'm willing to compromise on. You think you can just move me along, tell me to get out of the way, and ignore what just happened? A woman destroyed my daughter's medication on purpose. She did that. And you want me to sit down and let you continue this flight like nothing happened? No, I'm not leaving until this is resolved." The officer's jaw tightened, but he said nothing for a long moment. The silence between them felt suffocating, the weight of the situation pressing down on both men. Finally, the officer turned to the gate agent, who had been watching the exchange, clearly uncomfortable with the confrontation. "Get on the intercom," the officer muttered. "See if the captain can hold the flight for a few more minutes." David didn't relax. He knew this wasn't a guarantee. Even if they were able to hold the flight for a few more minutes, there was no certainty that the medication would be delivered in time. And every passing second meant more uncertainty for Maya's health. The gate agent hurried off to the nearby counter to make the call, leaving David with the officer. Maya sat in silence beside her father, her head tilted down, lost in her thoughts. David could see the strain on her face, the exhaustion creeping in. She had been through so much already, and now this. Her eyes were glossy, the threat of tears never far from the surface. David said, his voice softer now, "I know this is hard. I know you're scared, but you don't have to go through this alone. I'm here, and I won't let anything happen to you. We're going to get through this, I promise you." Maya nodded, but David could see the doubt in her eyes. She didn't know if they would be able to make it, and truthfully, neither did he. But that didn't stop him from trying. A few minutes later, the gate agent returned, her face etched with anxiety. "Sir, the captain has agreed to hold the flight for an additional 30 minutes, she said, her voice tense. "But the replacement medication is still on its way. We're doing everything we can." David nodded, but his mind was already working overtime. 30 minutes. That was their window of hope. If the medication didn't arrive in that time, they'd have to make a choice. It was a choice that no parent should ever have to make. Suddenly, Maya's voice broke through his thoughts. "Dad, I know you're trying to fix this, but what if it's not enough? What if the pills don't come in time? What if I don't make it?" David's heart cracked. He could hear the fear in her voice, the weight of her words settling on his shoulders like an unbearable burden. But he refused to let his daughter see how much that thought terrified him. "Stop," he said, his voice more firm now. "You will make it. You are strong, And I'm not going to let you face this alone. We're going to fix this. But the reality hung in the air, heavy and unavoidable. 30 minutes. That was all they had. And in those 30 minutes, everything would change. The air around David felt thicker with each passing minute. The tension was almost suffocating as he stood by the gate, watching the clock tick down the precious moments that could make or break his daughter's future. Maya sat beside him, her expression unreadable, though her eyes betrayed her growing anxiety. David could see the fear in her face, and it was breaking him to know that no matter how hard he tried, there were so many variables he couldn't control. The medication was on its way, but who knew if it would arrive in time? Who knew if it was even the right type of medication? Time was slipping through his fingers like sand, and with each second that passed, his heart sank a little lower. The gate agent, who had been frantically making phone calls and checking messages, now approached David with a look of frustration. "Sir, I'm really sorry, but the medication replacement is delayed. The courier's been held up at security. I've spoken to the captain, and they've extended the flight's hold for another 10 minutes, but that's all we can do." David's stomach churned. 10 more minutes? 10 minutes to save his daughter's life? It wasn't enough. Not nearly enough. Do you understand what's at stake here? David's voice was calm, but the intensity of his words made the gate agent visibly flinch. He wasn't angry at her. He was angry at the system that didn't care enough to help. "I'm not going to sit here and wait for some random delivery that might or might not make it in time. My daughter is at risk, and I can't just pretend like everything's fine." The agent, her face pale, nodded sympathetically, but there was nothing more she could say. She could feel his pain, but there were rules and limits to what she could do. And unfortunately, time wasn't on their side. David took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. The pressure of the situation, the weight of responsibility for Maya's health, was crushing. His mind raced. There had to be something he could do, some way he could take control. He wasn't going to let his daughter suffer because of bureaucracy and incompetence. "Where is the nearest pharmacy?" David asked suddenly, his voice laced with determination. The agent blinked, caught off guard by the question. I don't know, sir. There's a pharmacy inside the airport, but I need to know where it is," David interrupted, not giving her the chance to finish. "Now." Maya looked up at him, her expression one of disbelief. "Dad, what are you talking about? You can't just walk into a pharmacy and get the medication. It's specific. You can't just replace it." David's gaze softened as he turned to her, placing a hand gently on her shoulder. "Maya, I don't care if it's a special prescription or not. I will find a way. You need your medication, and I will do whatever it takes to get it for you. Just trust me, okay?" Maya didn't respond right away, her lips trembling as she searched her father's eyes for reassurance. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to have faith that everything would be okay. But there was still that gnawing fear deep inside her that made it hard to feel hopeful. But what if it's too late? Maya whispered, the words barely escaping her lips. David's heart ached at the sound of her voice. The uncertainty that had taken hold of them both was unbearable. He had never felt so powerless in his life. But as he looked at his daughter, he knew that giving up was not an option. "Not now. Not ever. We're not giving up," he said firmly. "We're going to make sure you're okay. We'll get you the medication, no matter what it takes." Turning back to the gate agent, David gave her one last look, a silent plea for her to help in any way she could. The agent nodded hesitantly and quickly pulled out a map of the airport, pointing to a pharmacy on the map near a different terminal. "There's one in Terminal 3, she said. "It's about a 10-minute walk from here. But please, sir, don't take any risks. You have to come back in time." David's mind was already made up. He turned to Maya. "I'll be back, I promise. I'm going to get your medication. Don't worry, everything will be okay." Without another word, David hurried off toward Terminal 3, his steps quickening as the seconds ticked by. The clock was against him, but he wasn't going to let that stop him. He could feel the tension rising in his chest, but the only thing that mattered now was getting back to his daughter. The rest was secondary. As David navigated the crowded airport, he couldn't shake the image of Karen's face, the smug look as she stood by, watching the destruction of his daughter's medication without a hint of remorse. He had tried so hard to protect Maya from moments like this, but he couldn't protect her from the hatred and ignorance that some people carried. He'd seen it before, the subtle racism that reared its ugly head in ways both big and small, but never had it hit so close to home. Never had it directly threatened his daughter's well-being. David didn't have time to think about Kara now. There was only the pharmacy and the hope that they would have the right medication in stock. As he reached the terminal, he scanned the area, looking for any sign of the pharmacy. When he finally saw it, a wave of relief washed over him, but it was fleeting. The line was long, and there was no way to tell if they would have what Maya needed. He took a deep breath, steadying his nerves. He couldn't let panic take over. His daughter's life was on the line, and he needed to stay calm. At the counter, a young pharmacist looked up at him, her face neutral but kind. "Can I help you?" "I need a very specific medication," David said, not wasting time with pleasantries. "My daughter has a medical condition, and I need this medication urgently. It's life-saving." The pharmacist nodded, typing quickly on her computer. "I'll need the name of the medication and the prescription details." Raced. He hadn't thought about the prescription. It was an oversight, one that could cost them valuable time. "It's for Maya. I don't have the prescription with me, but it's for a chronic condition. It's in my bag. Please, just check the records. I don't have much time." The pharmacist hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "Let me check our records, but if it's a prescription medication, I may need confirmation." David's heart pounded in his chest. "Please," he said, desperation creeping into his voice. "It's for my daughter. She can't go without it." The pharmacist disappeared behind the counter to check the system. David couldn't stand still, so he paced the small space, watching the clock tick down. His mind flashed between possibilities, the worst-case scenarios, the fear of losing Maya, but he couldn't afford to think like that. Not now. Minutes passed like hours, but finally the pharmacist returned. "We've got it," she said, her face bright with relief. "It's a special order, but we have a supply here." David exhaled a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. "Thank you," he said, barely able to hide the relief in his voice. He paid for the medication quickly, then rushed back to the gate where Maya was waiting. As he walked back, a thought crossed his mind, one that had been lingering in the back of his mind since this nightmare began. He wasn't just fighting for Maya's medication. He was fighting for her right to be safe, to exist without fear, and that fight was just beginning. When David arrived back at the gate, Maya's face lit up when she saw him. "You got it?" she asked, her voice shaky but hopeful. David smiled, holding up the small bag of medication. "I told you I would. Now, let's get you home." But little did they know, this would not be the end of their fight. What had started as a battle over a simple bag of pills was far from over. The consequences of Karen's actions were just beginning to unfold. David rushed back to the gate, the bag of medication clutched tightly in his hand. Each step he took felt heavier than the last, but with every breath, he reminded himself of his promise to Maya, "No matter what, I will protect you." His pace quickened as he reached the security checkpoint near the gate. Maya was still seated, her back against the wall, her eyes anxiously scanning the area. Her gaze immediately found David's, and the relief on her face was palpable. In that moment, despite the chaos that had unfolded, despite the uncertainty, Maya saw the glimmer of hope she had been desperately searching for. Her father had kept his word. "Dad," she exclaimed as she stood up quickly, her voice catching with emotion. "You really did it." David smiled, a tired but genuine expression. "Of course I did. I told you I wouldn't let anything happen to you." He reached out and handed her the small bag with the replacement medication. Maya clutched the bag to her chest, her eyes wet with unshed tears. "Thank you. I thought I was going to lose everything, Dad. I thought we'd have to cancel everything. I thought I was going to get really sick." David put a reassuring hand on her shoulder. You won't have to go through that. Not on my watch. The gate agent had been watching their exchange, her face filled with a mix of admiration and awe. As David stood there, looking at Maya, she approached him, her voice steady but filled with an undertone of uncertainty. "Sir, I need to inform you that there may be further consequences for your actions today," she said, her tone almost apologetic. David turned toward her, his brow furrowing in confusion. "What do you mean?" "Well," she hesitated, "holding the flight has caused a significant delay. We've already had to reschedule some passengers, and the airline is not pleased with the disruption." David's patience, already thin, snapped. He turned toward the agent, his voice hardening. "I don't care about the airline's schedule. My daughter's health was on the line. That's what matters." The agent took a step back, visibly taken aback by David's anger. She nodded slowly. "I understand. I'm not here to argue with you. I just need to let you know that there might be a fine or penalties for this delay. The airline may need to compensate for the inconvenience caused to the other passengers." David opened his mouth to respond but stopped himself. He glanced at Maya, who was now looking down, holding her medication, her face still pale with residual fear. Her father's anger was palpable, but at that moment, all he cared about was the safety of his daughter. Nothing else mattered, not the airline, not the passengers who were inconvenienced. "We'll take care of it," David said, his tone softening as he focused on Maya. "Don't worry about the flight. We're getting on this plane, and that's all that matters." But as he spoke, he realized that this situation was far from over. This moment, though it felt like a victory, had set something in motion. It was about more than just Maya's medication and the flight. This was about standing up for what was right, even when the world seemed set against you. The next few minutes passed in a blur. David and Maya boarded the plane, finally settling into their seats. The flight attendants were polite, but there was a tension in the air that no one could ignore. The cabin felt different somehow, a sense of unease lingering like a shadow cast by the actions that had just taken place. David tried to block it out, but his mind kept racing. He kept replaying the moment when Karen had destroyed Maya's medication, the cruel disregard in her eyes as she did it. He glanced out the window, the roar of the engines cutting through the noise in his head. His fists clenched as he thought about the woman, the one who had caused this entire mess. He hadn't heard her voice since the confrontation, and she had left the terminal after the security team intervened. But David knew deep down that she wasn't going to forget what had happened. She would make sure of it. He was right. The flight was smooth, but David's anxiety was unrelenting. As the plane ascended into the sky, he tried to focus on the fact that Maya now had her medication. She was safe for the moment, but as the plane cruised at 30,000 feet, David's phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number appeared on the screen. It was brief, but it was enough to send a jolt through his body. "You'll regret what you did today." David's fingers trembled as he read the message. The words were simple, but their intent was clear. Karen was still out there. She hadn't let it go. He knew that she would fight back. And knowing how far some people would go to make sure their actions went unchallenged, he realized that this might not be the end of the story. Later, as the plane landed, David and Maya stepped off the jet bridge, both exhausted but relieved that the worst was over. They didn't speak much during the flight, but now, walking through the terminal, Maya looked up at her father, a soft smile beginning to form on her lips. "I'm glad it's over, Dad," she said quietly. David gave her a tired but reassuring smile. "Me too. We made it. We're okay." They gathered their luggage and walked toward the exit. But before they could leave the terminal, they were stopped by airport security. Two officers, calm yet firm, approached them. "Mr. Williams?" One of the officers asked, his tone professional. David's heart sank. "Yes." "Speak with you about the delay in your flight," the officer said. "We've been instructed to inform you that the airline is pursuing legal action for causing the delay and disruption." David's stomach dropped. He had expected something like this, some form of punishment or reprimand for holding up the flight, but hearing the words out loud felt like a punch to the gut. His thoughts instantly went back to Karen. She had already contacted the airline, no doubt, to to file a complaint. The consequences of her actions were still unraveling. Legal action? David asked, his voice tight with frustration. What kind of legal action? The officer didn't seem to be in a position to offer details, so the other officer stepped forward. We can't comment on that, sir, but it's important that you understand the seriousness of the situation. The airline is filing a complaint, and you may need to respond. David turned to Maya, whose face had once again gone pale. He could see the fear creeping back in her eyes, and it broke his heart all over again. Don't worry, Maya, he whispered, holding her hand tightly. We'll get through this too. I promise. But as they stood there, David couldn't help but feel a gnawing sensation in the pit of his stomach. This was far from over. The road ahead was going to be tough, but David had already made a promise to his daughter. No matter what, he would never let anyone harm her again. And that meant fighting back, no matter how hard it would be. David stood in the airport terminal, his eyes scanning the two officers who had approached them. He could feel his heart pounding in his chest, the weight of everything that had happened hitting him all at once. He had stood up for his daughter's health. He had fought against ignorance and entitlement, and now, it seemed, the consequences of those actions were beginning to unfurl in a way he hadn't anticipated. The officers, still standing before him, exchanged glances. One of them, the younger officer, seemed almost sympathetic, while the older one was more stern. Neither of them were offering much in the way of comfort, but it didn't matter. David had made his decision long before this confrontation. Maya was his priority, and he wouldn't let anyone, no matter how much power they held, force him to back down. We need to come with us, Mr. Williams, the older officer said, his voice firm. David glanced at Maya, who had grown visibly anxious again. She was clinging to his side, her eyes wide with fear. The emotional roller coaster of the last few hours had drained her, but David knew she was looking to him for strength. He couldn't let her down now, not when she had already been through so much. We'll go, David said, his voice steady, but you need to understand something. I didn't do this for myself. I did it for my daughter. She's the one who suffered because of someone's careless disregard for her health. And no matter what happens now, that's something I will never apologize for. The officers didn't respond, but one of them motioned for David to follow. Maya, still holding onto her father's hand, followed closely behind. They were escorted to a small, private room in the airport, a place where David had hoped he would never have to be. As they entered the room, an airline representative dressed in a suit was waiting for them. She looked professional, but her cold expression immediately told David that the situation was about to get more complicated. Mr. Williams, she began, her tone distant and businesslike. I'm here to inform you that the airline has decided to file a formal complaint against you for delaying the flight. We have a strict policy regarding delays, and this has caused significant disruption to our operations. Your actions have put us in a difficult position. David's anger flared again, but he forced himself to stay calm. My actions, he asked, his voice barely containing his frustration. Let me remind you, the person who caused this situation was a passenger on your flight. An entitled woman who decided that my daughter's medication wasn't worth her time or consideration. She took it upon herself to destroy what was life-saving for my daughter. The airline representative's expression didn't change. Regardless of the circumstances, sir, the result is the same. You delayed the flight, which impacted other passengers, and now the airline is forced to handle the fallout. We can either settle this amicably or proceed with formal charges. David's eyes narrowed. Amicably? What do you mean by that? The representative hesitated, as if carefully choosing her words. We could settle this with a fine, or we could take it to court. The decision is yours, but I'll warn you, the process will not be quick or easy. It will be costly, and you may end up facing legal consequences. Maya, who had been silently listening, spoke up. Are you really going to punish my dad for standing up for me? For protecting me? The representative turned to her, but her face softened for a moment before hardening again. This is not about punishment, young lady. This is about business. and sometimes business has to take precedence. David stood up straighter, his eyes meeting the airline representative's gaze. I don't care about your business. I care about my daughter. I don't care what you do next, but I'm not backing down. I'll do whatever it takes to make sure no one else ever has to go through what we've just experienced. If that means fighting you in court, then so be it. There was a long, tense silence in the room. The representative seemed to weigh his words carefully before she finally spoke again. I'll speak to the higher-ups and see what we can do. For now, you'll receive a written notice about the formal complaint, and we'll proceed from there. But I do hope you understand that we cannot allow this sort of disruption to go unaddressed. David didn't respond immediately. He had made his decision, and it wasn't about appeasing anyone or backing down. He wasn't going to let a company's rules or a single woman's ignorance dictate his daughter's future. Good, David said, his voice calm but resolute. I'll be waiting for your notice. But mark my words, this isn't over. As they left the room, David took Maya's hand, walking through the airport with his head held high. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew one thing for sure. He wasn't going to stop. The road ahead would be long and full of obstacles. The airline's complaint would likely drag on, and there would be more challenges to face. But David had never been one to back down. His daughter's health and her dignity were worth every fight, every challenge, every sacrifice. They reached the exit of the airport, and David could finally feel the weight of the day starting to lift. The worst had passed for now, but the feeling of injustice remained heavy on his chest. He knew that he would keep fighting, not just for his daughter, but for everyone who had ever been treated unfairly, who had been subjected to prejudice, who had been ignored or mistreated because of who they were or what they needed. I'm proud of you, Dad, Maya said, looking up at him, her voice trembling but filled with gratitude. I don't know what I would have done without you. David smiled softly, his heart swelling with love for his daughter. You never have to worry about that. I'll always be here, no matter what. Out into the cool evening air, David felt a sense of quiet victory. He had faced down ignorance, entitlement, and fear. And in the process, he had shown his daughter the most important lesson of all, that standing up for what's right, no matter how difficult or uncomfortable, is always worth it. If this story moved you, if you believe in standing up for those who can't fight for themselves, share it with others. Let's keep the conversation going. Comment below and let me know what you would do in a situation like this. Would you stand up for your loved ones no matter the cost? Don't forget to hit that subscribe button, because together we can make a difference. Your voice matters. Let's fight for what's right.